I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Welcome to the March 19th, 2024 edition of the Toledo Planning Commission here in Toledo, Washington. And we have a quorum here. Get a motion to excuse Brian for some personal business.
I move we excuse Brian.
I got a move in a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. So moved. Get a motion for approval of the consent agenda in 3 parts.
So
Second.
I second the motion.
All right, anybody want to discuss the meetings of 2/19? I believe 2/19 was when the when you had your critical areas guys speaking to us. Is that correct?
That was last month. We had Francis here and we
Hey.
talked through. We also talked through some critical areas stuff and we also finished up with the housing element of the conference.
Good. If there are no questions, any questions on the meeting of 3/5?
I'm sorry,
Oh.
now
Uh,
it's the shaking of the head of the door.
I have a question, but
Yes, sir.
what's Denise's last name? The one that's taken over Dawn.
Shiro,
Pardon me?
Shiro.
Shiro?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
But she's not on here. She was just taking over Donna's business license, so it's not a new one.
Right.
So you guys shouldn't actually see it come through. We just weren't real sure of that process yet. Yeah. Oh,
And this is our regular meeting, not the
correct.
additional, okay, good, all right. I'm back.
I know that's when Tom was like, it's a workshop, and I was like, is it? You made me question myself.
Later in the meeting, our other business.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally, did you all have a chance to look at the business license application? Any questions on those?
Did get an email about a medical facility, a Valley View Medical Facility.
After business license.
I think if they are doing remote services, they do need a business license for the area. They might have a couple clients out here.
And they may want to advertise here,
Or,
they may want to advertise here in the area also.
oh, yeah, okay. So they would just get a license for the year.
An endorsement, yeah.
Then it's covered.
Mhm.
Okay.
Doesn't look like there's anything unusual in the application, it seems pretty normal stuff. How do we normally consider this? Do we just go by the name and kind of what they're doing, or?
Well, we kind of take an overall look at it, and if there's any questions, we bring those up to Rachel, and she tries to do a little follow-up if it seems necessary.
Got it.
You know, every once in a while, you get some kind of some business that comes into town and they're listed with a Toledo address and nobody's ever heard of what they do or where they're at. And
Sure.
it's just like in the know. The rest of them, because they're going through the state now, we have very little input as far as to the state business licenses. When you go to renew your business license, you renew through the state and then you add the additionally insured,
Okay.
like you would insured, so you have So they then send out the notices, isn't it, the state?
Department of Revenue.
And unless we object to these, I think they're more of a pastoral.
Right, unless it's something that's really gonna affect the town or something, some business opening here.
Yeah, and them getting the Toledo business license means they have to do their excise tax here, so we do get paid.
And it would certainly open them up for the first perusal on where they're at and whether that meets our zoning standards for
Right.
where they're putting their business. So
Thank
if there's no questions on this or either of the meeting minutes, can we get a vote on these consent agenda? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it, motion's approved. There are no commission reports that I'm aware of, and we're not having a public hearing today. Any add-ons to new business whatsoever from anyone?
I'd like to add on just a brief update on the Plan Growth Committee meeting at Lewis County today.
We'll put that down in other business. I think you have that in the other business.
Is it on the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think for a regular meeting, it's a pending item, their meetings are the same.
And moving forward to comprehensive plan status discussion. Want to start us out, Todd?
I will start us out. Thank you, Chair Birch. Good evening, members of the commission. The request at our last meeting was, can we provide an update that kind of shows what elements there are that we have to update, and maybe a little bit of a status on each. So I put together a list of the required elements, and as great of a planner as I am, I actually color coded them and then realized that the color coding doesn't come through when you put it in black and white. So the version that you got has all of the elements, but doesn't have them. So I went through and I just put text by them for my reference tonight. I can go through them quickly. Out of the required elements, we've completed the land use and the housing elements. The capital facilities plan will be at our May meeting, along with utilities and transportation. Climate change resiliency, we actually heard at our last special meeting, we talked about that one. There were a couple of minor changes to that, but I think I can work those out and just bring it back as part of the regular comp plan. The optional elements, your parks committee is working on the parks comprehensive plan, and I've seen a few drafts of that, and I commented on the last one, so that one's in progress. That one will either come back in April or May, depending on what the Parks Committee's able to deliver. School capital facilities plan, Rachel had some communication on that just this week. They've adopted their capital facilities plan, but apparently they don't believe they've adopted impact fees. So we can adopt their capital facilities plan with the impact fees in there, and then they can choose to adopt them, and we can start collecting them for them as long as we do that. So that one I think is as done as we're going to get it. So it's ready to be incorporated by reference into our plan. And then fire, we had the chief here in January. And he gave us an update on that, as well as a draft of that. He provided that, and so that should be ready. I'm not sure if the chief's going to come back and present that again, but that was nearly completed when he was there. So all of those optional elements, I think, are on a good track to wrap up well before June. So we should be okay for all of those. The code updates, the zoning code, I put as in progress, because per our last conversation, we wanted to maybe tweak that a little bit, and we can continue tweaking any of these, even though I believe they're completed. We can always go back and pick them up again. But the zoning code was largely complete. Then the critical areas code, we have floodplain and geohazards that were part of the critical areas draft that we reviewed at our meeting last time. And then wetlands and habitat, those will be back in April. So with that, that's kind of where we are on each of those. And sorry, the color coding didn't come through for the completed in process and delivered, but
Why is
Yeah.
there an asterisk on the results?
that's a new element.
Okay.
So that one we're not modifying, it's actually, we're creating a brand new element there.
So I had a question, and I probably should have added it. So when we were talking, at the last meeting about, businesses and when they do like full remodels, there's certain things that have to happen. We had something brought up, from Public Works this morning that the majority of these older houses don't have water shutoffs. And so I'm not sure if this is the time where we could work it into where if they've got any kind of plumbing being done, that it's mandatory for them to put a water shut off at the house, because as it sits right now, if a water main breaks in their house, Public Works has to either come out and shut that off, or I mean, in our code, residents aren't supposed to touch any, our part of the water meter and the shut off. And from the way it was explained this morning is that it's pretty easy. It's like a 15-minute job. They have to dig up the area and just cut it, or, put a water shut off. So I don't know if, because we were looking at the business stuff, if that's something that we could also put in. I know I'm kind of diverting, but
That's
I
okay.
scrolled out, yeah.
That would probably be a better item for building permits because they might not always trigger land use, which is the level that we deal with.
Okay,
But they would always, when they do a plumbing permit, they'd always need a building permit for that, right? That's something that's reviewed through there. So if the city adopted that as a new policy, or even if, I don't
an
know.
ordinance.
I don't know if there's an IBC or something like that that requires it now to have a shut off. If it's already required, then it would just be something to flag for Robert when he reviews plumbing applications or building permit.
Perfect, I can
applications.
look into that. Then there was one other thing, do you remember what it was? It had to do with the water lines for the,
I don't remember specifically what it was.
okay, I'll figure it out and I'll shoot you
But yeah,
an email, because it was
lines.
something that needed to get into the comp plan. It was something with the water. Yeah, I'll shoot
Okay,
you.
yeah.
Sorry, go
if
ahead.
There's something in there, that would be under the capital facilities piece, and that hasn't come up yet.
Okay,
So we probably between now and next month when it comes up,
okay.
that should be
So
fine.
when capital facilities comes up, we should get Jay here.
But are we thinking that this would be something that you would say, like, in 2 years, everybody should have this, or are you saying when they have a remodel, they should do it, or?
Yeah, I think if there's any plumbing that's being done, I just don't want to, like, there's a lot of people that can't afford a lot. So saying it's mandatory for you to go down and put a shut off, I mean,
Right,
even that extra, whatever, $195 for a call out, it's a lot of people can't afford it. So I think just if they're doing any plumbing work, I think that would be the time. And so I knew we were talking about it last month. I wasn't sure if it was something that kind of correlated the same, but yeah, it makes
Yeah,
sense.
I mean, we could put it in our zoning code, but like I said, most of the time when you modify plumbing, it doesn't rise to a zoning
Yeah.
level review. It's just a building permit
Yep.
or a plumbing. permit.
I'll do my end and see what kind of policy we need and go from there. So that's
Okay,
perfect. Thank you.
yep, and in capital facilities, utilities are water and sewer, that's section 1.4, so that'll be, I have that as May, so that'd be April or May.
Okay,
Just
we'll
finding out.
let one of the guys know, because they were just wanted to make sure a couple things.
So where do we lose jurisdiction at the meter?
Yeah, but if the meter is ours and then everything past the meter is theirs.
Okay. Having a shut off out.
Yeah,
I don't have one in my house.
Really?
Well, mine is under my house. I have to crawl around in the crawl space and crawl under there to turn it off.
yeah, because it's an older house.
Yeah, maybe for the day then.
I don't. But I'm also not prohibited from turning off my water at the curb, which is what I usually do. I mean, the water meter itself has
Have a shut off.
a shut off on the outside of the meter, and the
Right.
meter, the vault's not locked, so I just pop the lid off and turn that off. It's easier than me crawling around. the
It
crawl
is.
space. But I don't have another separate thing that's next to the water meter to shut my water meter off, to shut my water off to the house, which would be convenient. If you weren't allowed to have access to your water meter.
Yeah, mine's right in my bedroom, actually. It's like in my closet for the whole
Oh.
house, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know why they put mine in my crawl space, but
Yeah, that's spiders.
other things too.
Yeah.
There's lots of stuff in that crawl space.
Don't want to meet.
Maybe the
Okay.
previous owner.
So we're tabling that for now and.
Yeah, I didn't mean to I know Todd's got a lot.
now I'm
yeah.
reading all about it. So
Yeah.
It's a state law.
My bad, guys.
No, it's cool.
But I think that the reason that we wanted to talk about this was to decide if we needed a special meeting, and of course, in April, I can't. Attend a special meeting in 2 weeks, but we could look at schedules if we feel like. We've got too much. But I don't know, it kind of looks like we're on track. We actually have until December to adopt all these things, so.
I think the extra meetings are gonna make a big difference. I think we're getting through stuff a little faster.
So if we wanted to schedule an extra meeting in April, we'd have to look at. Doing a meeting back to back, cause I couldn't meet 2 weeks from now.
Just to remind you guys, you actually did set a special meeting for April 30th.
Mhm.
Oh, April 30th.
Yeah,
Okay, so we didn't set one for,
because there were just too many challenges with
Yeah.
everybody's schedule.
so 2 weeks from now, I'm actually out that first week in April,
Mhm.
so
So the
then
16th and the 30th in April.
16th and 30th, okay. Do you have that?
I think Cindy's more accurate than the calendar.
Yeah, well,
I added to the city calendar as soon as you guys confirm, so.
That's great.
perfect. So I think. I think we're probably on track. I can rearrange this based on the April 30th meeting. So that we can tackle some things ahead of that. I can see if Mike's ready to start talking about capital facilities, utilities, and transportation. At the end of April. And then we'll have hopefully Francis in to do more work on the critical areas codes in April too.
So now what's your anticipation when trying to get this in front of council?
Well, hopefully, I think we'll wrap things up. It looks like probably in June or July, so council would be July or August,
Public hearing,
public hearing, and they're not gonna see it in pieces. You've been working through it in pieces, so they don't have to. They'll see the finished draft of the comprehensive plan, and they'll see the mapping that we've done for the zoning and all of those things. And they'll see our zoning code and critical areas codes all in one packet. Whether or not.
Should be a long night.
Well, if Rachel decides that she wants to break that up, we might take a few nights to get through there, or we may do a workshop and something else, but. Council will see the finished product of your work, so they'll have it a lot easier it should be a lot quicker for them.
Yeah, and I think if we just get it out sooner, hopefully we could tackle it in one
And
meeting.
public hearing is at council, not here.
Correct.
Comp plan will do a public hearing here and at council because it's a legislative action, so it's. So we'll do a public hearing here on the whole thing, probably, like I said, June, July. And that's when I'll bring the full plan back to you so that you can review it, say that it's consistent with what we've talked about.
so essentially, we're gonna have a public hearing and. If things go correctly, then make a recommendation to the city council, who will then hold a second public hearing.
And we can take input from that public hearing to amend things if we need to.
Yep, I can amend them, so as long as at your public hearing, when you have that at the end of all this. You'll have the completed documents together as a packet, the same way council will. And then you'll go through there, you'll do a public hearing on that. You can make any last minute changes, and then you can either direct that it's got to come back for a continued public hearing, or you can say. Forward this to council and make these changes before it gets there.
You know, nobody told me when I moved in here that I was gonna have a separate bookshelf just for Toledo. Yeah, for real.
And so this is the entire workload, right? That's everything we have to get through.
That's everything that you've gotten through and everything you have to get through. So that's the whole package of what we're actually doing for all the elements of the comp plan update and zoning code.
So what would you like to address tonight and how can we get through it?
All right, well, I think the quickest way would be,
I've got two packages here, one on land development code, 21 pages, and then another 20-page
on critical areas.
critical area.
So the land, let me see which one's on our agenda first. Just close that window. Our agenda has the revised critical areas draft up first.
The trauma.
Probably because of the alphabetical nature.
Just blame it on me, Todd. It's fine.
No, I think that I don't know. I remember making that change.
Forgiveness.
It looks like the other changes that I remember making are all in here except for the other one that I made. So I believe this is an updated version with 2 exceptions.
Updated.
So this is basically what we talked about last time with the changes that were identified, except I didn't correct Daft. And I also added a provision,
You did, but you didn't.
I also added a provision in the,
Oh,
you open that back up again. So the critical areas code, yes, there it is. So I also added a provision in the section, the administration section where it talks about the role of administrator. I added a part in there that doesn't appear in the draft that you received that shows that that the city clerk shall be the administrator, and then I renumbered those sections. So I said, for the purpose of this code section, the city clerk is the administrator, and then it goes on to role of the administrator. So that also didn't appear in the draft that was posted, but everything else in there is the draft that we talked about last time with the changes that we talked about last time. So all we're doing is reviewing to see if there was anything additional that you all wanted to make. The notes that I have remaining in there that we don't have a procedure for the land use permit approval, I think we'll revisit that because I'll have to update your procedures code too. So that'll be part of your zoning code that I'll add at a future date, and that'll develop a procedure for a land use permit. But the other changes were all addressed as we had discussed them.
I had, Todd, I had this, well, yeah, a couple questions, same question on two different pieces. On page 10 and also on page 11 are listed some permitted activities and in and around the critical areas. Now, I know we probably talked about these last time. I guess I'm just surprised that a permitted activity would include development with an on-site septic system in the city limits. We don't do that, do we? We don't have septic systems in the city limits.
There are some.
So you don't permit them anymore with development.
Okay,
But so this, the critical areas code will apply only within city limits, because that's all the places where your code applies.
right.
But there may be some areas within your future city limits out in your urban growth areas where somebody may propose a septic system for a house out there. And this section doesn't necessarily allow it if it's otherwise prohibited. This just says it's okay in a critical aquifer recharge area. So within that specific critical area that you can do on-site septic systems, those are allowed. But you still have to comply with all the other provisions of your code, which may prohibit them. So,
Such as disposal of radioactive materials.
yeah,
So that's already covered by something else. You can't dispose of radioactive substances in city limits, I assume. Near a critical area, especially.
Didn't we talk about this? Like, what about if somebody put uranium in the ground? So,
I think maybe so.
okay. Yeah, that is strange.
I'm just curious, Todd. Maybe I'm missing something. There might be a heretofore or a whereas that I'm.
so the prohibited activities are under section 1, which is the bottom of page 9 and top of page 10. Right.
Right, yeah, prohibited.
And those are prohibited.
Those did not catch my eye, but the permitted activities.
Permitted activities.
On page 10, section 2, those caught my eye, and I just thought it maybe,
yeah, on the permitted, you have gas stations using MTBE, but in the permitted section, you can have gas stations.
Yeah, so it does seem, so, and is it in general, the idea of doing the radioactive substances, for example, is something that if it wasn't for the aquifer recharge part, is something that would be just on a conditional use, we'd have to evaluate, is that?
Those are essential public facilities. Those types of things go through a conditional use permit.
Okay,
And essential public facilities are allowed in some zones in the city, but they'd have to go through a conditional use. And they'd have to go through special requirements to show that they were compatible.
so in this case, it means that this particular item and the aquifer recharge would still have to go through its conditional use permit, and in addition to that, it would have to apply for this to be able to do it within this area.
It would be allowed to be within an aquifer recharge area. So again, here, we're working with the county's code, and we're adapting it. So these are the things that the county allows. If you want to look at these specifically and say that those aren't allowed or they're not permitted uses, we can either just take them out of permitted uses or we can move them down to prohibited uses.
You know,
In
Todd,
aquifer recharge
versus
areas.
landfills, surface mining and wood product preserving or treatment facilities. I wouldn't want to think that that kind of an activity was going on in an aquifer recharge area. I mean, I don't know if the thing I didn't understand was whether this was just one phrase or one word that I was misinterpreting.
No,
or whether
it
all
doesn't
of
seem
these
that way.
are permitted activities. And I don't know, I don't think of myself as a greener.
Right.
I don't think these are necessarily good ideas.
Well, and so that's why this comes to planning commission for review. Like I said, what I started with was the county's code, so this is
Right.
what they allow.
Yeah.
So it should be sort of correct for your region, but in your case, if you're looking at those and saying, well, these shouldn't be allowed within aquifer recharge areas within the city of Toledo. This is the local review part. This is where you all get to say, well, we don't want that. So
Right,
I
because county
can-
has such a wide area, they could choose a designated area that's unpopulated or something like that, where we have a very small area to choose from, so.
That's correct. So it may not be right for the city where it is right for the county. So. So if you'd like, we can look through these one by one and I can delete them from our draft. And then if you'd like, you can also indicate as to whether or not you'd like them moved down to the prohibited uses.
Well, I see, I could have kept reading, Todd. That after the list, A through Z,
Sorry?
conditions, number one, required conditions, so there are already local, state and federal regulations in place and best management practices. So I guess maybe I'd rather see that under a conditional activity.
Well, and I think he's talking about it having to go through a conditional use permit anyway.
That's what I was
And in
thinking.
which case you'd get that opportunity to say yay or nay.
Well,
But-
we need a critical areas permit process too. We don't have one of those currently.
Right.
And those aren't usually conditional uses, so they don't bubble up. They're usually staff level reviews. And then if the administrator sees fit, then the city can hire a third party reviewer and they can give us information on it at the applicant's expense. And that's kind of what we added in from our conversation at our last meeting.
Because I mean, I can see a half a dozen in here, you know, I think of aquifer and I go, no, I wouldn't want that, and I wouldn't want that, and I wouldn't want that. And there's others I say, man, why not? You know, why not have a golf course on an aquifer?
Well, I'm totally in favor of that.
Huh?
I'm totally in favor of that.
Yeah,
Well, the herbicides do go into the groundwater.
Yeah,
If we
well,
want a clean lawn.
so I guess let's look at the list and, you know, Commissioner Hill's right. They're all subject to state, federal, other approval criteria. But also that nuance is still very true. You know, the county has a lot more area to cover and a lot more aquifer recharge areas of varying severity. I mean, here in Toledo, the aquifer recharge areas that we have would mainly be related to the public wells that we take our water from. So, you know, maybe we want to be more protective of those than what the county is, and we can do that. That's why we're reviewing this draft. So as we're looking at those permitted uses, we should potentially pull out things that we don't think are applicable within the city.
well, there's only like 10 or 12 of them. You want
Well,
to go?
there's A through A through Z, so
Is
that's,
there any correlation where we could say, because I think if I'm hearing this correctly, what we're feeling, or I mean, I don't mean to speak for anybody, but what I'm getting out of it is that we seem to feel that this is the only check that's happening for these things, whereas I think most of us will be comfortable with, well, most of these things will probably have some conditional permit they have to go through first. This is an additional thing if they happen to want to do it on the recharge area. Is that an accurate way of looking at this, or am I?
so if you don't say it's a permitted use here,
Yeah,
then it's less likely to get approved through a critical areas permit review,
right,
which is most likely a staff only review, not a conditional use. So if somebody
Okay.
comes in and does a development permit application to build a new gas station. And if that gas station is a permitted use in the underlying zone, then it's not a conditional use. It doesn't come to planning commission.
Right.
It just gets approved by staff. This review, if they're in a critical aquifer recharge area, would also be required. And that would also happen by staff. So none of these would really bubble up to a conditional use, but we would apply all the criteria in here as well as the other sections of our zoning code and the other environmental areas or whatever regulations apply. And all of these would likely trigger SEPA review because they're all within critical areas. So, but if you take it out of the list, then staff can't approve it. And you could make them prohibited uses, or if you'd like to say these are conditional uses, then you could also do that, and then they would bubble up. That would change the critical areas permit component of it to a conditional use. We don't have any conditional, just permitted and prohibited in here.
so the radioactive substances thing is the only one that stands out to me as, I don't know why we would want that in the city. Everything else, if it's gonna follow the regulations of the state and it's gonna trigger a SEPA review. And all the due diligence gets done on those, that may be good business for the town, so I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Well, and if you're doing wood preservation on a commercial basis, you're putting an awful lot of nasty stuff into the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of these. That,
Excuse me for just a moment, Tim. For some reason you want to interrupt
Can't
this.
contain myself. Okay, the reason that you need all these is because of the city has a dump. And so if you don't have these in place,
Okay, you'll have your 3 minutes at the end of time
that's
then.
why I'm putting all of it down.
But I thought the city dump was kind of out of commission. I don't mean to go misdirect what we're talking about, but okay. So how are we feeling? Do we want to just keep these in there? Do we want to go one by one and say if we don't want it at all in there? Because if it's here, it'll be considered a permitted activity, so they'll go through their standard process of providing all the documentation they need per state regulations and SEPA and all that. But then if we don't even want that to happen in the town, we should say it now. Right?
Yeah, we should take it out of the permitted uses. And I guess I'm looking at the permitted uses and I'm reading slow, but I'm trying to find the one, which letter is it that's the
H.
H is radioactive.
radioactive
Substance.
substances?
Y is wood product preserving. X is surface mining. O is landfills.
Well, each and every one of these in some way is gonna have some type of a chemical involved that's going to affect your groundwater system.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
why they're specifically listed as permitted here. Because they're calling out that, yeah, we're gonna let you do these things subject to all the other regulations. But
Rather than going through these one by one and making a determination right now whether we agree with it or not, I'd rather pull them all. And make them all conditional uses and bubble the permit up.
I agree with
I
that.
like that,
Okay.
Steve, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a better idea.
so if any of the uses below are proposed, then this gets to be a conditional use permit. So that way it gets a public hearing, basically. It gets a public hearing in front of you all, probably.
Well, and that's good, I mean, I think, otherwise we're asking Rachel or Carly to make a pretty heavy decision, really.
Yeah, and people have a say in what's gonna go in their town. I think that's the best solution.
You don't want anybody else chasing after you, so.
No, I'm good. I've made friends. Enough of them. I do.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
either love me or hate me. Go in between.
By consensus, is that our, what we agreed that we'd like to do?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay, so then for the prohibited activities. Those are actually, that actually does include landfills. That are prohibited in critical aquifer recharge areas. Underground injection wells,
The wood products preservation.
yeah, facilities that store, process, and dispose of. That's interesting, it's in both prohibited and permitted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was, I didn't see that when I went through because. I'm just using county code, but that exists in county code too, so it's both prohibited and permitted. I'll flag that for them in there, because they're going through the update these as well.
And in this case, I like the clause that talks about the administrator can also determine if there's anything else going on that's actually degrading the groundwater not listed here, they can make it prohibited.
Yeah, and that way, if through SEPA review or through staff review, something gets flagged, we can make it a prohibited use there.
Sounds good.
So,
Move on.
yeah, that is kind of weird that it appears in both places. So the other thing I did down below, when we were talking about mining. I think there were some questions that I couldn't answer about some characterization of soils. Just notes to myself. And then, yeah, the mine hazard areas, I deleted all of those, and then I also deleted the section down below. I deleted all the standards for hazards for mine studies, and I deleted all the mine studies because I think you looked last time, we don't have any mines, so all of that got deleted. So I guess if there was no other discussion on that, then we're okay. But as I said before, if you notice anything, we'll continue to work with this section of code, although from here, this point out, we'll focus on more of the wetlands and habitat pieces. But if you see anything else, you can always bring it up in a future meeting too. We're still workshopping all of this, so.
So we. I think it looks fine, but I'd like to, maybe, is it possible to table the final until the next meeting, just not to revise it again or go over it, but in case we wanna just read through it a little bit and take our time with it.
Always, yep,
Okay.
yep, and if you ever have any questions about this stuff, we can always bring it up. It's not final until we're done.
Now, page 18 of 20 on your mine hazard areas, we decided to delete those, right? Since
Yep.
we have no mines, right?
Yep, we're deleting that section as well as the requirements for the mine hazard studies, so. Just deleting all of that. If we're, I guess if we're ready to move on, we could talk a little bit about the draft zoning code.
Yes.
And I guess I can cruise through these edits. We've been through all the zoning code previously. The things that I changed in here in this draft are shown with track changes and they're in blue for me, but they're underlined if it's in black and white. And it's under, if we look on the mixed use commercial zone, we have looked at permitted uses and looked at commercial office as a permitted use. And then we've made the exception for, except for medical facilities, treatment or providing counseling or drug or alcohol treatment and other professional services. And then we've added that as a conditional use in a new section 3 down below. And then the other thing that we did was in waterfront mixed use zone. In the table that we have for the mixed use commercial, which is the downtown commercial and the waterfront mixed use. I've added in that table, this is subsection D under section 2, which is the zoning use table for WMU and MU zones. And what I've done there is I've added medical offices less than 5,000 square feet, not including drug or alcohol addiction treatment. And I've left those as allowed uses in both zones. I've added a line that for medical office greater than 5,000 square feet, I've left that as conditional. And then I've said medical office or medical office facility. I have an oven there I need to take out. Medical office facility for drug or alcohol addiction treatment as a conditional use in both of those zones. So that spoke to that change that we wanted to make. And I've done the same in the commercial zone. Generally, I've made that a conditional use, which is the next section down. And then I added a new section 4, which is probably the biggest part of our discussion tonight. We talked a lot about commercial design standards. So I wanted to be sure I had this. I'm reasonably sure I got that right, that you wanted to make those conditional uses, but this I'm not sure that I have right. So I'd like to take a closer look at this section. We talked about it in detail and you gave me lots of good direction, but this is the first time you've seen it adapted to code. I think last time I gave you a menu and you get to pick and choose and you said, oh, I like this one better than that one, or I like this one, but some of that one. So I have it here.
Before we go any further, in the opening paragraph, did you mean, is that supposed to be Cowlitz County Assessor? Or should that be?
Oh, Lewis County Assessor. Where is that?
The bottom of the first paragraph.
Yeah. Last line, first paragraph.
Cowlitz County Assessor, yeah. See, I work in too many counties. So I will change that bottom of the first paragraph to Lewis County Assessor.
That's nitpicky, I know, but.
That's just accurate. That's good.
Well, yeah, I guess if it's 50% of the structure value, Cowlitz County Assessor listed as 0, so they don't have a listing for that one. Good catch, thank you, Commissioner Hill.
And these are all the things that we talked about, Tom.
They are. I presented that menu of choices and this is based on our discussion. I believe I've captured everything, but I think you all were still largely undecided on some of these too, so.
I think we went section by section and pretty were clear on the options available, which ones we wanted.
Yeah, this is pretty, I mean, to me, this does not seem too onerous or crazy. It seems pretty straightforward.
I think we were trying to balance the design standard we'd like to see with how much of a burden it puts on the developer or the owner.
And the remodels especially for people.
And that's that opening paragraph where I basically talked about that, setting it at. And you were undecided on whether 50% was the right number, but I think everyone generally agreed that using something that was easy to interpret, like using an assessed value and saying because your building permit has to list a construction cost even for the permit fee calculation.
Right.
So if your construction cost is greater than 50%, that's when these come in. But I think the 50% question was still up in the air. I stuck with that because from as best as I could tell from reviewing the record, nobody really suggested anything different, but I know that there was some, is that too high? Is that too low? Looking at some of the assessed values of property downtown here, that would be a fairly high bar. This wouldn't get triggered frequently. I think nobody really does that big of a remodel. But
It would probably be a new business coming in, building something from scratch.
any new construction triggers it. Yeah, the following standards apply only to new construction or remodel that requires a building permit and is a modification of a structure or building and has construction greater than 50%.
Do you have, Todd, an idea of what that median number is so that we could, an average 50% would mean this much budget?
I think I did pull up some, but if you'd like, I can.
I think you kind of off the cuff one that sounded about reasonable. I mean,
Yeah.
taking the building value minus the land value and what you have there.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and if, so I think you're looking at, if you look at a $300,000 structure, which I think that, there was one of those here that did qualify. Let me just see if I can, because I have the data here, we can just look it up. No, it's the wrong one. But if you wanted to know, for example, I could just zoom around town and we could click on a few and see.
I was just curious, because it seems like it's gonna be at least more than 125,000 is what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
On average, right?
that's what I was thinking, that the $300,000 mark for commercial buildings in downtown Toledo was probably a low bar. I think most of them are probably valued at more than that.
Yeah.
So 150,000 is where the trigger point is. If they're doing a remodel that costs 150,000, then that's.
You start throwing some things in there like asbestos remediation and things like that, you get on the high dollar pretty quick.
That's true. So if somebody's doing an interior remodel, they might get there.
I think that leaves a lot of room for small remodels and improvements that people do without triggering these things.
Exactly.
What do you guys think?
Yeah. I mean, $150,000, and if you're gonna do that for a remodel, you can probably afford to, put an awning up or something.
Yeah, I'm still good with the 50%, if you guys are.
Okay. Well, and I think we talked about a couple of different other ways that might be evaluated, but if you're all okay with the 50%, I think that's a pretty high bar. I mean,
That is a high bar. I mean,
if you're remodeling half of your building value, then that's a big remodel.
if we're talking about, we want them to hit 150 before they're required to put an awning over their front door, I think that's ludicrous. That there needs to be something, either two different scales that they meet where certain conditions apply.
You wanna put a number on it?
Well, let's say, a budget exceeds 20% of the value of the building, you're required to do these things.
Oh, I see, and it slides.
Conform with a sliding scale so that, that you're not you're not waiting until the guy tears the building down before you get a little bit of cover. for
Yeah, this
pedestrian
protects
traffic.
everybody who has a current business to not do any of these things.
Right.
Yeah,
So maybe 2 pinpoints there or a sliding scale and,
We can do that. You know, we could say that, that you have to, provide a budget, towards these improvements of X if you are at 20%.
I agree.
Or you have to complete at least one of the elements off of the list if you're 20%, or one of the things that's non-conforming, you have to bring into conformance at 20%. And a lot of different ways you could do that. You could say that if you're going to do, for building permits that have a value of 20% of the assessed value of the building, they have to set aside at least 10% of the construction budget to be put towards this. That would be one way to do it. Or you could just say that if you have that 20%, you meet that 20% trigger, they have to complete at least one of the non-conforming elements and bring it into conformance. I mean,
Who makes that decision? The
Building
city or the
official.
building?
the building official would make that decision.
Okay.
Because that, the zoning code is the only control you have over it. Once you've set the zoning code up for it, for the design standards and what the triggers are, then it gets implemented. Well, through a new permit process, but this whole thing about the building permit, that would only be applicable through the building, so that would be city staff and plans.
and as it's written right now, the 50% essentially triggers a review on every single one of these things.
That's right,
Okay,
that's right,
so
50%.
it's not just the awning, it's all of it.
All of it,
Okay,
yep,
so
so it's a
to your
bit,
point, Steve, I think you're right, that, yeah, so we wanna specify at this percentage, you need to at least do the awnings, at this percentage, you need to look at this, and if you're over this, you gotta do all of it, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so the building right down here on the corner. Yeah, it's the one that's not on our corner, but on the corner across the street, I'm not sure. Professional services, commercial retail, the improvement value by the Lewis County assessor is 246,000 on that building. So if at 50%, you know, you're not quite at the 150,000. You're more in the $120,000 range, but still a significant amount. Across the street, there's across the street on the other corner, that's on the south side of 505. That one's 258,000. Let's see, you were asking about Donna's before.
So do you
Donna's
wanna?
Bar and Grill is valued, the building is valued at 150,300. Is what the assessed value of that building is, so. Just a couple of snapshots around from a block down, that's what those are. So 50% would be a $75,000 budget for Donna's. To put it into perspective with a specific name business.
So do we do something like 25% triggers the awning? And then, I mean, all the other ones seem to be pretty big, things like, having to put the variation on the roof line. I mean, that involves a lot of construction, right? You gotta break the roof open and do all kinds of repairs, maybe replace the roof if it's an old roof at that point. So I don't know what, you have an idea what how would you apply the sliding scale here, I guess is what I'm trying to figure out. Which ones would get the 50%?
So the 50% is all of them, right? If you're doing 50% or more, you have to bring all these into compliance, which would be a significant task.
Chairman Burke was suggesting that we do like a sliding scale on these so that maybe we only ask people to do the awnings if they're doing a 25% remodel, you know,
Sure.
The 25% exceeds.
So maybe 25% could look at C, D, and F.
yeah, essentially they're gonna be non-structural or pretty much non-structural aesthetic improvements to the outside of the building.
Yeah,
And those are the ones that are C, D, and F.
okay,
You know, A is facade articulation and building massing. You're not gonna change that with a cheap remodel. Roof line variation, again, as you were saying, that's not cheap. C is building materials and exterior finishes. F is entries and building orientation, so you could do something to promote you could move the door to a better location or something. So C, E, and F, I think are all possible with a 20% remodel. Ground floor commercial spaces, so the D, ground level transparency and pedestrian engagement might require them to add or modify windows, which I guess is the same level of structural modification as moving a door. So that, I guess it's, if you just wanted the simple stuff at 20%.
But you can do it structurally without a great expense. It's not like moving a wall and you have load bearing beams that you gotta change, where you're just doing headers. That normally would be engineered headers and walls, instead of using an engineered header for a window or a sliding.
But the tricky part there is with the state building codes, and I'm not a building official and I don't know the nuance on this, but I do know from working in that area that a lot of people don't want to touch the exterior or the structural walls of a building because
Because of the energy calculation.
it's the earthquake calculations.
Okay.
So the seismic calculations that you have to do when you touch a wall sometimes make you do crazy things to an old building.
I can attest to that.
So maybe for the 20%, we want to limit it to building materials and exterior finishes and awnings and rain shelter is what you have to achieve if your building's not already in compliance.
Right.
And how far does that go, as far as like, if somebody has their whole building clad in vinyl siding or something? And suddenly this gets triggered, I mean, and it looks fine, what happens in that case?
Well, then they would pick the other one, right? Or
They'd
Oh, I
probably
see,
pick
'cause
the
you can
other
pick
one, or they
either-
could add shutters to their windows and
Got
that would be
it.
a cheap aesthetic improvement that would break things up.
So it's one of those different things that they can pick, they don't have to do all three of them, but the appearance ones.
right,
Okay,
that's what I was suggesting at the 20% is that they'd be allowed to pick one of the elements that's not compliance and bring it into conformance.
that sounds fair.
That's not fair.
And, you know, we could just let them pick from the entire list. We could just say you have to pick one of the elements and bring it into compliance, and if they wanted to pick something that was structural because their remodel included that, then they could.
Well, yeah, don't forget that in some cases it might actually be cheaper for them to incorporate it into their remodel
Yeah,
and satisfy a more onerous structural change because it happens at the same time as the remodel versus starting afresh.
if they're already touching that wall and they've got to go through the structural evaluation for it anyway, then maybe they do want to move a door or add a window.
Okay,
So-
so then the sliding scale is the amount of things you have to do, so at 20% you do one, you can pick which one you want. And then if you get to 50, you gotta do all of them, that sort of thing. Okay.
So pick which one you want, as long as it's something that's not already in compliance.
Right?
So if somebody already meets the rain shelter,
They don't get to point to it and go, well, I'm done.
yeah. So they have to spend money to bring the building more into compliance. But they could pick one from the list at 20%. And then at 50%, they have to comply with the list.
So that brings up another point in my mind, which is, let's say they have everything complied with, but the one they don't comply with is a high cost one, but they trigger this at 20%, now they have to choose. What do we do in those cases? Kind of like,
Then what could they be doing that, what kind of remodel would be required if they're already in compliance with all the other issues?
Well, they could still want to remodel. I mean, even if they meet all the
yeah,
standards here, I
they're
mean,
just
if,
doing a normal remodel, they're moving a window somewhere.
if they have a brick building downtown that has great ground level transparency and it already has the door facing the street with a recessed door or an awning over their front door, then they've basically met all of our requirements, right?
So is there an avenue for them to appeal the requirements and have them waived?
Not currently, but we should probably add one. So given that discussion, we should probably put something in there that allows, if your building already complies with these elements, that no additional upgrades are needed or something like that, because we haven't said that.
But I think we can round that out by simply saying 20% applies only to these, but you can choose any of them.
As long as your building doesn't already comply with it.
Right, and if your building complies with these two, you're good. That sort of thing. In other words, that you only need to really, the only ones you must choose from are the ones that apply to that 20%, but you can choose from any of them. But you must comply with those in some way. So I guess if you're compliant with both of those, you don't need to do anything. Right? Like, let's say there's two that only trigger at 20%. And you have them both and you've triggered this, you shouldn't have to comply with any of the other ones then.
Or you could just build an easy out in, saying. Again, using the percentages, you could just say that, at 20%, you have to pick one from the list below. Unless that exceeds more than 50% of your budget. Or 20% of your budget or whatever. So if you have a $150,000 building and you have a let's see, 150. That's basically what, a $30,000 budget at 20%. So then if you do the math, if you're at 20%, $30,000 of $150,000 building. So then if compliance with this code exceeds 50% of that, 15,000 of a $30,000 budget, 25% of that, 7,500, then you don't have to do it. So that's the other, or as you were suggesting, we could just say at a minimum, you have to comply with the materials and this, and if you don't comply with those, you still have to pick one.
Yeah, so if we're talking about the let's call them, for the sake of conversation, the cheaper ones, right? Let's say we have one or two of those, and we say that if your remodel is less than 20% of the cost of your property, then you must have one of these improvements to choose from if you need them, right? If you have satisfied both of these, you're good to go. And then if you have if you're doing something that's about 50% of the cost, then all of these apply to you. And if they're all satisfied, great. But if they're not, you have to do them. And just keep it sort of simple like that.
I can write that.
Yeah,
That way it's not too complicated.
You can write that so it's readable.
I can write that in code.
and get the correct county.
Now you're really challenging me. So now the question to you all is which are the cheaper ones up there? To me, it seems like C, the building materials. And then the F, awnings and rain shelter protection along pedestrian routes. Because an awning can be that can also be a structural element too. Awnings, when they attach to faces of buildings, are structural. So
I think we just that we have the phrase rain protection gives them some leeway to put something not too complicated up if they need to.
Oh, okay, so
We do have the words just or a rain protection.
Yeah, recessed entries or rain protection or awning over the entry. So we could just take out awnings and just call it rain shelter along pedestrian routes.
What if somebody sticks an umbrella in a flagpole holder?
Don't think they wouldn't try.
Yeah, that's right. You leave it vague enough.
Umbrella and a can.
That's right.
So
It's
are
rain
we,
protection.
are we generally agreeable that the approach to take is 20% or less has to do at least, has to meet the minimum requirements of these two, and if you've done that, then you're off the hook.
I suggest we do make that range structure as a permanent range structure, take away the umbrella in a can.
Yeah, let's make the language so that you can't put an umbrella in a can. I agree with that 100%.
Okay, so we're gonna add a 20% limitation. We're gonna take away the umbrella in the can, And we're gonna say at 20%, then you have to at least comply with building materials and awnings and rain shelter along pedestrian routes. Period.
Now I completely see what you were talking about the percent of the remodel, because if they have a building that has these different finishes. And suddenly this triggers and the remodel cost is whatever, $20,000. But now to do the siding or something like that, it's gonna be another 20.
You better
We
hurry
have-
up on your permit, Renee, is all I'm saying.
We have to, I'm not touching the exterior, it's perfect. But I'm thinking that the idea of saying that you can do one of these, but it shouldn't exceed the amount, a certain percentage of what you're spending on your remodel, I mean.
Right, because I mean, just looking at the $150,000 value for Donna's, and I don't mean to pick on Donna's, it's a great place to go and eat. They even serve beer there, so I kind of like that. But just looking at the assessed value of that, it's, you know, $150-some thousand. That means that there, again, I mean, at 30%, that's gonna, or at 20%, that's gonna be about $30,000 of a remodel. So if that building were to invest $30,000 in trying to make themselves better, then we're gonna trigger them to do one of these things. And I guess I'm not familiar with the facade, but that might be the cheaper of the two.
Facade notwithstanding, if you went in there and wanted to actually make it a real kitchen. You could easily spend $150,000 in there, because essentially it's a kitchen for pizzas and fry cook.
Yeah.
If you wanted to make a restaurant out of it, and you actually wanted to serve fine food, you would need a separate.
Did they do
sort of
good
kitchen
meatloaf over
separate.
there? I've had their meatloaf and their chicken fried steak. They do all that and
Mhm.
oh, I had no idea.
They do.
Wow.
So I guess my question here is, how do we protect people from not ending up with this giant thing that they have to do because they triggered this and we didn't think of a way to protect them from, you have to replace all the siding in your building now because you wanted to move this door a little bit or something.
Oh, man.
So that's what I'm worried about, I guess.
Yeah, that's valid, I think, because we don't want to discourage people from improving their business.
Right.
I mean, that's the last thing in the world that we want to do.
Well, I think there is a disconnect between what assessed values are and what construction costs are,
Right.
you know, because you're assessing a building at what, $150,000?
Well, so maybe we have the 20% set too low.
Because, you
Yeah.
know, you sit there and you go, okay, well, if I had to reproduce that building, what would it cost me? Well, it's more.
Or
like
just buy it
$5.
outright right now. You're not gonna buy it for that much.
Right.
Yeah.
No, the assessed values are typically below market value. I mean, almost, I've never seen them
And
different.
they never keep up with construction costs, so.
It's true. So the way we adjust for that was we would just adjust the percentage at which we would trigger.
So maybe we're back to the 50%.
Well, 50%, but then you have to come into compliance with everything, or then you want to bump the 50 up to 75 or 100% of assessed value, and then make a partial compliance at 50%.
What if we just said it's 50%? And then if something came up that somebody was just finding it onerous, they could come and we could do a conditional sort of approval on what they wanted to do, because that experience will show us what's lacking in our code, I guess. And we can then amend the code based on the experience that we gained from working with people, or is that just gonna create a giant nightmare?
Well,
Or they could fight it with like a CMA, they could say that's the assessed value, but if I was to sell my place today, it's gonna actually sell for $400,000 as compared to the 150 assessed value. And we could just require it come from a licensed real estate agent, and that could be something that comes to planning, and they could make any kind of
But you'd have to get
recommendations
that
or
with
stipulations.
with every building permit then.
Anything that's gonna be a remodel that would trigger to redo things.
Right. That would be an added burden on the applicant. Whereas this is just a quick check we can do with staff. And
Yeah,
if we don't agree
if they fought it, if they wanted to like fight it for some reason, is there any kind of like appeals process? You know what I mean? Like
Oh.
if they came back and said, this is crazy, like the assessed value is way too low, and I could say, well, we can take it to planning, kind of like what you're saying, you should go get a CMA from a real estate agent. It could come in front of you guys and you guys could maybe grant some kind of like stipulations or some kind of conditions.
In order to do that, so we can't just have somebody come before you all or council really and say, this is unreasonable because it's too much cost. Because then it's a discretionary, you know, I let you off the hook as- because I can see your point, but you don't make such a good case, so I'm not gonna let you off the hook. And it's the same request, so if you offer that variance process without any non-discretionary conditions, so I think a better way to get around that is probably to go back to the percentages.
Yeah,
To say that if this code section compliance you know, requires that you spend more than 20% or 30% or 50% of your remodel cost as evidenced by a bid proposal from a contractor submitted for the extra work, then we can waive this entire section.
Now, what if it's an insurance claim? Because a lot of times insurance claims will only replace it at the same value of what it was. They're not gonna update things to our code.
That sounds too bad for being under.
True too.
Yeah, that's an important point.
But that would be, I mean, if somebody comes in for damages to their building and they can't repair it, we could exempt that. We could say that if this is a result of
Mhm.
some damages by fire or other hazard, that this doesn't comply, it doesn't apply. Or we could just take out the whole trigger for the 50% and just leave it with new buildings.
So
That's where we started, right? We
Yeah.
started with, this is only gonna apply to new buildings.
if we have the 50%, we all agree that's a high bar, right?
Well, I think so. We don't want to be seen as not trying to encourage people to improve their businesses.
Right.
At the same time, we don't want to be seen as making it so onerous that somebody will just sit in a dilapidated building because they can't afford the price of doing business and doing the remodel. So I think probably sliding back to your percentage is probably the easiest way to do that. And don't get into the particulars of what if, with
Well, we
what
can always
if.
come back when we have more use case data.
Well, so that's the other thing. I think if we're gonna bring this back. And it sounds like we are, we'll bring it back again to another planning commission meeting, but Rachel can pull the permit costs for anything that's happened downtown. And we can see what the value of the construction, because each one of those building permits will have, I know make it work for you, so.
No, it's fine.
hope
I've
you're
got a
fine.
really cool program that will give me that information really
Cool.
fast.
Yeah.
Click, click.
Nice. So if we can pick the building permits and remodel permits that were issued in the downtown core. I can pull from the assessor's site and get some average building costs, and so we can average yours and mine, and we can see how many of those would have actually triggered this.
That sounds useful.
Yeah, we don't have
Yeah.
we don't have any of that data, but I could reach out to Winlock and see if they could provide me theirs. I'm sure they would.
Which,
For the downtown, like construction area, you're talking about businesses? We don't
yeah,
have any businesses that have pulled. for
oh,
building
so
permits.
there's nobody down here that's done any remodels or building permits.
Cindy didn't do anything in 505 Gallery?
Not that we were informed of.
I just walked by it.
I just walked by and it's been totally
Oh,
remodeled.
man, it's been gutted.
How about our new street vacation and bookstore and things?
They didn't need to do anything.
They didn't need.
No,
to
I
do
went
the
down there
permits.
and I talked to the inspector and they were fine. They had everything that they needed.
Are they-
Yeah, there's quite a bit of people that I'm getting reports on that are doing unpermitted work. And after talking to the inspector, all I can do is send them, if I catch it in the act, I can send a stop work order. And then charge them double the permit fee, but we don't really have any recourse for
Well, the
like, what am I gonna
contractor-
do? Like,
Contractor is licensed for doing
Exactly.
unpermitted
Yeah, you
work.
can report it.
yeah, I've reached out to a couple, so we had some roofers that came out and I sent him a letter and I was just like, if, you won't be allowed to do business in Toledo if you continue to do work unpermitted.
Well, or you can just report them and then they'll lose their license. They won't be able to do business anywhere.
Yeah.
That's why a contractor doesn't
Well,
like to work without a
that's good
permit.
to know, yeah, so I don't, but again, if people aren't using contractors and just doing it
Yeah,
themselves,
yeah.
so.
Did you find any examples of other municipalities that are doing similar type of things?
I didn't really look, I mean, I drew all of the examples from similar municipalities, but I did not look at the triggers because that was something that we came up with here, so I didn't do any additional.
It'd be interesting to
research.
see just what other people, because I mean, it's a thorny issue, especially when you start going down a little bit of what you're actually gonna trigger on.
The jurisdictions I've worked in seem to apply it to only new construction to require the design guidelines, but they're in communities that are redeveloping a lot quicker than Toledo is, so. I think you're more,
They're raising the buildings and starting over.
yeah,
And, you know, I mean, for as long as I was in business, though, you knew right away, if you were gonna keep a building, if you did a remodel, you were gonna have to bring it up to code. And code meant all the code,
yeah,
and you had to figure that into your price.
So I'm thinking we are gonna leave it unchanged until we get more data and talk about it again.
okay, well, and I will try to pursue, I guess if we don't have any. What I could do is just generate some things based on 20%, so I can pull the assessed value of all the structures downtown out of the GIS system. So I can just do that and figure out what the average of 20% would be. And then based on that, we can probably target a secondary level where you can exempt projects that would impact more than a certain percentage of the construction budget. So we can kind of work at it that way since we don't have any permit history downtown.
Okay,
And I can bring that back at our next meeting.
can we move forward then? Do you want to give us an update on the Lewis County Plan Growth meeting for today?
Oh, do I ever? That is. Thank you, Chair, and again, members of the Planning Commission. Today I attended by Zoom the Plan Growth Committee at Lewis County. And so the primary focus of today's meeting, you know, we're all talking about comp plan updates and changes, and the county's talking about ways that they're gonna change their regulation of the urban growth areas. So one of the things that they've always done is they've said for these communities that have worked with us through the comp plan process, we'll recognize your zoning and your comp plan designations within your UGA. Toledo has not been on that list. So the county has agreed to add Toledo to that list in their county code. So now we'll be one of the jurisdictions that when somebody does a permit outside of city limits where we have no real jurisdiction, that they would apply our zoning code and regulations when we adopt our comp plan. So that means that the zoning that we adopt for our UGA will have some weight because they'll use our code to apply the zoning within our UGAs.
That's good.
It does not apply, so this is in the draft that they have putting together. It's not yet approved by the Board of County Commissioners. Just like all this has to go to our council, all this has to go through their Board of County Commissioners, but I don't see any reason they change that. The other thing that they're adopting, they're talking about is delegating certain authorities back to cities within their UGAs. Right now, through interlocal agreements with Centralia and Chehalis, those cities process all development permits with a few exceptions in their UGAs. So the county doesn't even approve if somebody comes in for a site plan review in their UGA, they don't approve that. So we talked about that a bit when we were pursuing also getting an interlocal agreement with them. We've abandoned that because we have so little UGA. It doesn't really mean that much to us at this point. And the properties that are in our UGA aren't too likely to redevelop anytime soon. Because they simply don't want to urbanize. But the county is talking specifically about, okay, well, outside of that, for these communities where we're applying those, why don't we just let them, why do we require an interlocal agreement at all? Why don't we just let them process certain things that they can process for land development permits? So they're basically talking about letting cities even without a development agreement or an interlocal agreement, process everything except for land divisions within their UGAs with certain exceptions. They still want to be consulted and be the authority on critical areas. They want to be the authority on roads and public works standards, except that they'll defer to city standards where they don't conflict with county standards. So and that's kind of what they did for us when we did the 100-lot subdivision up on the hill. We worked with the county and we said, hey, these are the city's adopted road standards. We know these are county streets because at that time they weren't annexed. Can we apply these standards? And they said, well, yeah, those are more urban than ours, so we appreciate that. So the county let us apply our standards to that subdivision. So in those cases, they'd still let us do that. But we will have it looks like the county's headed in a direction where we will have some limited authority to approve development permits. But not building permits and not code enforcement, and we won't be able to do plats or subdivisions. Because those all require Board of County Council acceptance and approval, and we can't supersede that. That's the other piece is that they can't give away our shorelines and floodplain regulations. So for those two critical areas, they can't give that up. So good news, I think the county's working in a direction so that we're not even going to need an intergovernmental agreement to be able to do that. It's still going to have the same limitations that I think it used to under the intergovernmental agreements, because they didn't ever give away that authority before. So we had a lot of discussion today about should the county permit any subdivision of land within the urban growth areas? Because when you allow that, you're taking if you have a 20-acre piece of property out there and somebody wants to chunk it up through a subdivision in the county, then why would they ever want to annex? You know, and usually the smallest parcel that you can fit a well and septic on is probably about 2 acres. So what they're saying is, okay, well, we'll allow them to subdivide, but only for a certain number of lots and only down to 2 acres. If they're less than that, then we won't allow that to happen in a UGA. So we had a lot of discussion on that, and that discussion moved that bar a lot from 2 to 5 acres and back to 2 acres.
Where did it end up?
Well, right now they're going to revise it. This is the one that they had presented today, and it had it at 2 acres. And I think that it's probably going to stay so that division of land that creates 5 or more lots where each lot is less than 2 acres in size shall not be approved within an urban growth area. Divisions of land to create 5 or fewer where all the lots are 2 acres of size or larger may be approved by the county. And so I think that's likely to stay. One of the things that I asked the county for today was to add a provision in there requiring them along with that, if the county was going to allow them to plat, to also record a covenant with the land that said they would not be opposed to annexation. Sort of similar to a utility service covenant that a lot of jurisdictions use when you connect to city water and sewer services. A lot of times you'll have to sign something that says, yeah, if you ever want to annex my property, I won't be opposed to that. And it runs with the land, so nobody can ever be opposed with that. You're a willing participant in annexation after you get utilities. But what I said is, can't we do the same thing for plats? If you're going to approve something to be subdivided, because we already have that just heading out of town on 505. There's a lot of those 2 acre lots that were platted. And when I was doing your land capacity analysis, we assumed no redevelopment of those parcels simply because the owners of those parcels bought them for a reason. They enjoy that lifestyle and they don't want to subdivide. And most likely their kids and grandkids and generations won't want to. So it's not likely in the next 20 years we're going to see anything redevelop on those pieces.
It brings up to the question. I mean, it sounds like good news that they're heading forward a little bit, but from the standpoint of where our UGA was originally designed, going all the way out to Highway 5, we sort of put residential up forward, and our industrial and our commercials parcels are actually out more towards I-5.
True.
Since they're not allowing us to subdivide essentially like a real subdivision without them doing it and without them issuing permits and without them doing all the legwork, what's in it for us?
What's in it for you to be able to review and approve development outside of your city limits?
Well, other than applying standards, but let's say we did decide to take a parcel out there and our first section of UGA, they actually allow us to have for a 100 lot subdivision. Other than applying our standards to that, all the benefit revenue wise is going to the county.
It's true. I mean, if something develops in your UGA, and the county does not want to see any more development in the UGA, but they also seem to be generally in favor of private property rights. So if a property owner wants to do something with their property, to a certain degree, the county is siding with the property owner and saying, well, they should be able to do something with their property. We shouldn't prohibit subdivisions entirely. We shouldn't take away your ability to subdivide just because you're in a UGA. We should allow you to subdivide to build something there. So that's the balance, really. I mean, to prohibit everything is to take away a lot of property rights from individuals, and they're just not gonna be happy, because then it would just say until the time the city annexes you, can't do anything with the county.
It's not been too far from where their attitude's been.
I don't know, I've
I mean,
found,
except for Napavine and the two major players in the UGA game, Chehalis and Centralia. You know, which has become a problem for this, not only for each individual city, but for the county having those huge
yes,
communities out there in the middle of nothing.
yeah. Well, so the county's trying to get out of that. Right now, they are in a bind with Chehalis and Centralia, because none of those people want to annex. They already have city water and sewer, they already have, well, I mean, they don't have city policing, but generally they have everything they need, and they don't want to get annexed into the city where the taxes there are higher. Here they're lower, but in their cases, so people don't want to annex, and they haven't gotten utility service covenants on those. So the people that have the city services aren't bound to annex. And so what we're trying to do, what the county's trying to do, is be proactive and not allow that intense level of development outside of the city limits. Their primary policy is shifting more towards, yeah, if you want to develop to an urban intensity, you need to be inside the city and you need to talk to them first. But there's that stopgap for people that don't really want to be inside of a city and just want to do a little bit of development on their property. They want to subdivide it for their kids. They want to, you know, they have this piece of property that's been in the family for generations, and they want to sell off a few lots to help pay for retirement. You know, and the county doesn't want to get in the way of the small time development. So they're trying to balance those things.
That's tough, because that's a long-term I mean, it goes against what the interest of the city may be in the future. If you allow somebody to subdivide their 25 acres into 5 family lots, that'll never get annexed after that. And you take a look from growth needs and housing needs, where are we gonna be? Because you take that out of the circulating population of land.
For the next 20 years, presumably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so from the prospect of our own growth plan, what we're anticipating and forecasting for our housing needs, it exacerbates our problem when we have parcels being taken out of the loop like that, to allow for those individuals who want to maintain control of those parcels of land by subdividing like that.
And we have that on the north side of 505. I mean, there's no utility service covenant, there's no agreement to annex. If the property owner that's just down the road from those parcels wanted to annex, we couldn't annex them, because there's no link to our city limits. There's nothing in between. That property owner would have to enlist other property owners to
You have to connect
join.
it all the way back to the city.
It has to be connected, has to be contiguous.
Have to pay those costs.
So if we have more of those types of developments that happen incrementally out there, we may never be able to annex out to our commercial and industrial areas, because those may subdivide in the county and then nobody wants to sell or annex, and if there's no trigger in there. So to me, the biggest dangers of doing this are parcelizing the land, you know, and locking it up so that it couldn't be redeveloped or wouldn't be redeveloped, but that's less of a concern than annexation. If enough of this happens out in our UGA, or for us, our urban reserve area, then it could potentially block an annexation, by petition anyway. There's that new tool on the books that allows it to happen by increment through interlocal agreement with the county, which I think is probably a good way to annex, because then you don't have to get the 60%. You can just annex people whether they want to be annexed or not.
Yeah, have crosses burned on your front yard.
Well, maybe, city planners don't usually rise to that occasion, but planning commission chairs, maybe, I don't know.
I'm just a guy that owned a Tesla and all of a sudden I'm hurting because people are putting me on fire, you know?
Yeah,
You
well,
that
and
sticker, I bought it before Elon went crazy.
Yeah.
so that's the discussion we're having at the Planned Growth Committee meeting.
Well, Todd, is there any, I'm assuming there's not really anything we can do to stop the county from doing what you've described in our UVA.
Well, I think if you all feel like this is something the city wants to be opposed to, then what I probably need to do is make a stronger stance. You know, I didn't because I thought that they were working in a way that was probably gonna end up in the best compromise that we could all hope for. But if you're hearing what I'm saying and you're saying, we definitely don't want it to go that way, then what I need to do is probably work with the county and Rachel and the mayor, and we need to get a meeting with them and say, look, this is something that Toledo doesn't want.
Well, Steve makes a really good point, because it is against our long-term best interest. I personally, if I was the king of Lewis County, I'd say that, you know, okay, in this particular area, and I don't know that it would be in our UGA, but I want to see people have 1 or 2 acre lots. I'd rather see people kind of having a country lifestyle, but close to town, but not too close to town. And not in our UGA.
It's tough, yeah, you know, even for the newbies, and I'm 15 years, I'm a newbie. I mean, I came here because I could buy a nice larger piece of land on the river and have a country lifestyle. And now I'm saying that's not what I want for the new guys coming in, because we need the tax revenue.
Well, see, it's all.
And all the things that go with it, so it's a tough one.
So I guess I am presenting this for information, but if you feel like this is going in a direction that we should be more opposed to, then I can either adjust my tact at the next meeting next month. I can just say, hey, you know, we had some conversation about this and we're not really too excited about the 2 acre limit. You should make it 10.
Oh, I see. So we would want to sort of pursue strategies that enable that long-term view that we want to have. And so is that the only option that we have, is to just talk about the minimum size of the parcel that you can subdivide to?
Well, or just to strongly advocate for, yeah, people in our UGA shouldn't be able to do anything with their property until we annex them into the city. You know, we can advocate for that too.
I don't know if I like that.
Yeah.
You know, but that's the discussion we're having at the county level. To figure out where their policies are, and just like we have discussions about evolving code here. Those are the discussions I'm involved with the Planned Growth Committee. So they're not saying this is what it's going to be. They're coming to us and saying, well, this is what we think, and then we give them input, and then they evolve the draft. And based on today's input, it sounds like the 2 acre, you know, Centralia was well represented there, and they talked about that. They said, okay, that they were against the 2 acre to begin with, and then they brought that up and had a conversation at the table, and the other jurisdictions that are represented all kind of brought them back to center on that, I guess. And they said, well, okay, I guess I can see where 2 acres isn't such a bad thing.
So what was their argument for 2 acres?
It's kind of the similar to what Chair Birch and what we're discussing now is we don't want to see a bunch of small parcels of land out there that are going to make it difficult for redevelopment or make it difficult for us to achieve the vision. And you know, oh, by the way, that, you know, these people are going to contribute to our local schools and put burden on our infrastructure and not be paying city taxes and increasing the population out there. So sort of the same arguments that you're bringing up. You know, we don't get any tax benefit from this development in our UGA other than, you know, maybe they come into our town and frequent our businesses, but other than that, there's no real.
So do we want to advocate for 5 or something like that? Is that
10?
Yeah.
I mean, they've been a 120 county forever. I don't know why they changed.
Well, they have, they would still apply city zoning. So I don't know how that works for urban reserve, because we won't have any new UGA with this update. We'll only have the urban reserve areas. So I could bring that up and say, would you please apply city zoning in the urban reserve areas? Because we will adopt zoning for planning purposes. It won't have any effect unless the county enforces it. So now that they're doing that, I could have that conversation with Mindy. That way, at least our commercial and industrial property doesn't get subdivided into residential uses in the meantime.
We're trying to protect the future of our town here, and the future is always to me been seen as making our way to Highway 5 and taking advantage of the commercial opportunities and the industrial opportunities, which would bring jobs. And the jobs will require housing, and if you can't put housing because everybody's got their 2 to 5 acre parcels all divvied up with their family members. You're digging a hole for yourself and waiting to have it shoveled back on top of you.
I agree, the need for affordable housing and the fact that we're right on the corridor. I mean, that seems to be the prime, that's cheaper to live here than it is to live in Centralia, say, or in Olympia, and you can still get to these places pretty reasonably in a commute.
Yeah, our housing analysis showed that. I mean, we are the affordable housing outlet for the greater Seattle, Tacoma.
That's what I think,
Metropolitan
that's
area.
the thing
I
we
mean,
really wanna protect.
This is the affordable housing provider for those jurisdictions. So when they talk about us having affordable housing, we are the affordable housing.
So unless I hear an objection, I prefer we went back and maybe took a little stronger stance on that.
Well, and I just thought about what I brought up earlier. There's lots of places near Toledo, but not in our UGA. There's lots of places where people can put 1 and 2 acre, or 2 acres probably, houses and have a country lifestyle. They don't need to do it in our UGA.
If
There's a lot of places to do that.
So they could do that outside of our urban reserve area and do it in Lewis County where it's appropriately zoned for that. So, you know, and that's similar. I mean, on the south side of town, that's not in our UGA or urban reserve area. So there's a lot of area on the south side and out 505 on the other side of the river and other things that aren't planned to be in town.
Right.
So, and all those areas, I think those are all zoned RDD 5. Or a lot of those are zoned RDD 5, which is 5 acre minimum lot development requirement, so.
Yeah, that seems to be the better option to protect our interests long term,
So, yeah, I think so, yeah. On second thought, I think protecting our UGA as much as we can, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, I think that's good, clear direction. I'll bring that back to the county and certainly bring that up. I'm one voice at a table with many. You know,
Yes, you
all
are.
the communities are represented there.
they're gonna be like, "Toledo- we just
Chair
let
Birchman
Toledo in.
used to
What
attend those
happened?"
with me. The Plan Growth Committee meetings, yeah.
Yes, I recall. All right, that concludes business, brings us to public input. If you'd like to speak, please state your name and address, come up to the podium.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what's on. Emily Morgan, 301 South Fifth Street. Great meeting, guys. Thanks for being here. I have a question about, buildings that haven't been lived in more than 10 years in town. I live, right next to a building that hasn't, had anyone in residence in about 13 years. And so I'm just curious about what the city's, stance is on that, and if we could get, people living in that building, and I'm sure there's more people or
I
more
know who you're
buildings.
talking.
Yeah. And then also, what is, you mentioned the police plan?
Parks,
The police,
fire, not police.
you didn't mention, okay,
No,
all right,
there's no police plan in our comprehensive.
Police is a general fund item, it does not.
okay, never mind then.
So parks, schools and fire are the 3 that we're adopting.
Schools, Fire, okay, great. And then the city's plan for the dump. Well, because it was a Superfund site, that was kind of what I was like, oh, sit on my hands for. Because it was a dump for more than 40 years, so it's got cars, batteries, possums, and who knows what thrown over the edge. So I believe though, some of the wording in that was probably for the city's protection, that's what I was imagining.
Are you talking about the dump site out on Toledo, Winlock, or Toledo Mayor?
506,
506?
yeah.
That's not, that's way out of city limits.
It's out of city limits, but it is owned by the city. And if you've never been out there to go check it out, I am urging you to go check it out because
Is that the parcel you had asked me about? Carly?
people have been
Think so,
checking it out.
yeah.
There is an old RV that the city owns.
Well, let me interrupt you right there on that. This is
So
a subject that should be brought before council, not before planning commission.
it was just the dump. So but the planning commission does have
We act under the direction of the city council and the mayor,
Yes.
and until they give us instructions on what to do, we can't really act on them. And so if you'd like to bring this up to council and have them make a recommendation from the planning commission, look into it,
all right,
we'd be happy to work for them.
okay, all right, that was it.
Thank you
Very much. May I get a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.